The next few days turned into a gentle rhythm. Luke would stop by after work, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with coffee, sometimes just with quiet company. He fixed the broken light in the hallway, helped her carry boxes from the attic, and even cleaned the gutters one weekend. She tried to protest, but he just smiled and said, "I need something to do after work anyway." Each time he came, the house felt more alive. There were moments when laughter returned to sound. Emma hadn't heard from herself in so long that it startled her the first time it happened. She'd laugh, and Luke would grin in that easy, boyish way of his, and for a little while, grief loosened its grip on her chest one evening. While they sat on the porch drinking tea, the sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Luke looked out at the trees swaying in the breeze and said, "You know, Mr. Harris used to drive us out to the lake on Saturdays. He was always patient when Daniel and I messed around. I always admired that about him." Emma smiled, her heart softening. "He loved having you boys around. You brought so much laughter to this house." Luke's voice lowered. "It's strange being here again. Everything looks the same, but it feels different now." Kima nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "Everything feels different after someone you love is gone. Even the light in the house changes." Their eyes met then, and for a brief second, time seemed to pause. There was no romantic intent in that moment, just an unspoken understanding between two souls who had both lost something. But under that quiet connection, something new began to stir, feelings she couldn't yet name. The next day, Luke arrived with takeout for dinner. "You need to eat something other than toast," he said, half teasing. They sat at the dining table where she and her husband had shared countless meals. The chair across from her had felt painfully empty for weeks. But tonight, with Luke there, it didn't dot. As they ate, she told him stories about her husband, about their first date, how he'd spilled coffee on himself, and how she'd laughed so hard she couldn't stop. Luke listened, sometimes laughing, sometimes simply watching her with that patient calm of his. It felt easy to talk to him, like she didn't have to guard her heart so tightly anymore. After dinner, he helped her clean up. Their hands brushed while reaching for the same dish. And for just a heartbeat, she felt something warm flicker between them. She quickly looked away, her face flushing with confusion. She wasn't supposed to feel this. It wasn't right, not so soon. But she couldn't ignore that when she looked at Luke. She didn't feel broken anymore. When he stood to leave, the air between them felt heavier somehow. "Thank you for dinner," she said, trying to sound casual. He smiled softly. "No need to thank me. I like being here." Her eyes lifted. "Why?" He hesitated before answering. "Because when I walk in here, it feels peaceful. And because you remind me what kindness looks like." Those words stayed with her long after he was gone. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about how grief and comfort could exist together, tangled and confusing. She thought about how someone who was once just her son's friend could suddenly mean so much in the following days. Luke's visits became part of her routine. Sometimes he'd bring her flowers from a local market. Sometimes he'd fix something around the house. And sometimes he'd just sit quietly beside her, watching the rain. They didn't need to fill every silence. Their presence was enough. One evening, while Luke was fixing a loose cabinet handle, Emma stood by the counter, watching him. He had grown into a kind, dependable man. She suddenly remembered him at 17, laughing in her backyard, covered in mud after a soccer game. Time had changed him, but that same gentle nature was still there. When he caught her watching, he smiled. "What?" "Nothing," she said quickly, turning away. But inside, her heart was trembling. Not in sadness, but in something that felt almost like hope. As he packed his tools, he looked at her and said softly, "You know, you don't have to face everything alone." Her throat tightened. "Sometimes it feels like I already have." He shook his head. "You don't have to anymore." That night, after he left, she sat in the living room, surrounded by the quiet once again. But this time, the silence didn't hurt as much. It felt different, lighter, because she knew he'd be back tomorrow, for the first time since losing her husband. Emma felt a spark of life returning, small, fragile, but real. She didn't understand it yet, didn't dare name it. But somewhere deep inside she knew. Luke wasn't just visiting out of kindness anymore. Something was changing between them. And the thought both scared and comforted her at once. The days grew shorter, and the mornings carried a crisp chill. Emma found herself waking up earlier than usual, not because she wanted to, but because she expected Luke's knock. She tried to shake the thought, telling herself it was too soon, that she wasn't ready to let anyone into the quiet corners of her life. But when the knock came that morning, hesitant and soft, her heart leaped. Luke stepped in, brushing the dampness from his jacket. His smile was easy, familiar, and somehow comforting. "Good morning," he said. "I thought I'd bring breakfast this time." "Pancakes." Emma smiled genuinely, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You really don't have to," she said, but she meant the opposite. She was glad he did. They cooked together, a quiet, unspoken rhythm forming between them. Luke poured the batter while she stirred the syrup. Flour dusted the counter and his sleeves, making both of them laugh. Emma hadn't realized how much she'd missed laughter. Real laughter, until it filled the kitchen again. It was innocent, simple, yet it pulled at something inside her she hadn't felt in a long time as they ate. The conversation shifted naturally. Luke shared stories about his new job, the people he had met, and some awkward encounters at work. Emma told him about small things, too, how she tried to care for the garden, how she kept forgetting to water the plants, and how she sometimes sat in the living room remembering her husband. She spoke without restraint, something she hadn't done in weeks. Luke listened, never judging, always patient, making her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since her grief began. After breakfast, he offered to help with some repairs around the house. The simple act of working together felt almost ordinary, but to Emma, it was extraordinary. They hung a picture frame, fixed a wobbly chair, and organized shelves. Emma realized how much she had missed having someone by her side. Not to fill her void, but to share moments, even small ones. That once seemed insignificant. By mid-afternoon, they found themselves sitting on the porch, the cool breeze brushing against their faces. Luke was quiet, but Emma felt no need to fill the silence. There was a comfort in his presence, a sense of belonging that wrapped around her like a soft blanket. The porch, once so empty, now felt alive with gentle warmth. "You know," Luke said suddenly, breaking the quiet, "I remember when your husband used to tell me stories about Daniel's childhood. He had this way of making us feel like family, not just friends visiting someone's house." Emma nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "He loved family," she said softly. "Even when he was tired or busy, he always made time for us." Luke's gaze held hers for a moment, calm and unwavering. "You were lucky," he said. "You had someone who loved you fully." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. They were a mixture of longing, remembrance, and gratitude. She smiled through them, feeling a strange lightness she hadn't felt in months. Over the following week, Luke's visits became routine. Sometimes they went grocery shopping together. Other times he helped her with chores. Each moment, no matter how small, began to fill the house with life again. Emma noticed her laughter returning more often. She caught herself smiling over little things, Luke's jokes, his awkward attempts at cooking, and the way he would sometimes hum quietly when he thought she wasn't listening. One rainy afternoon, they sat by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Emma spoke of her husband, of the memories that made her ache, and Luke simply listened. He didn't try to offer advice or platitudes. His presence alone was enough, a reminder that someone could care without trying to fix her heart. That evening, while they prepared dinner, flour on their hands and aprons dusted with it, Emma laughed so hard at Luke's attempt to flip a pancake that she almost fell off her chair. Luke grinned, cheeks flushed, and she realized she hadn't felt this carefree in years. The house, which had once been a sanctuary of sorrow, now felt warm again. As they cleared the table, Emma caught herself watching him. There was a quiet, steady kindness in his eyes, a patience that made her feel safe. She didn't fully understand what was happening, this stir in her chest, but she didn't want to fight it. For the first time, She allowed herself to feel a small spark of something beyond friendship. Later that week, Luke stayed to help organize the attic. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, streaming through the window, and as they sorted boxes, Emma found herself laughing at old photographs, old letters, and forgotten trinkets. Luke's presence was comforting, steady, grounding her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. They paused in the attic, looking at the old photos of Daniel as a child. Emma smiled, touched a picture, and whispered, "He was such a little troublemaker." Luke laughed softly. "Some things never change," he said. "Even when we grow up, the trouble follows us." Emma laughed again, but this time there was a different undertone, a mix of joy and melancholy. She realized how much she had missed connection, the quiet companionship of someone who truly saw her. Days turned into weeks, and with every visit, Emma noticed the small changes in herself. She started looking forward to his knock at the door, feeling a thrill she hadn't experienced in a long time. Her heart, which had felt heavy and cold, began to thaw. She found herself sharing more, laughing more, and even remembering to care for herself in small ways, watering the plants, keeping the house tidy, and making an effort to dress for the day, even if she stayed inside. One evening, as Luke fixed a cabinet in the kitchen, he glanced at her with a soft smile. "You've changed," he said quietly. Emma paused, unsure how to respond. "Changed?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You're lighter, happier in a way I haven't seen in months." Her heart skipped a beat. Could he really see it? Could anyone see the subtle shifts in her emotions? She swallowed hard, feeling a flutter she didn't understand. "Maybe," she said softly, looking down at her hands. He set the screwdriver down and turned toward her. "You deserve to feel that way," he said. "You've carried so much alone. You don't have to anymore." Emma felt warmth flood through her chest, a combination of relief, hope, and something more she couldn't name. She realized in that moment that her heart was opening again, not to replace the love she had lost, but to allow herself to feel, to connect, to live. That night, after Luke left, Emma sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the week. The house still carried memories of her husband, but it no longer felt empty. Luke's presence had brought life back into her world. She realized that grief and healing could exist together, that the heart could remember love while learning to embrace new warmth. For the first time in months, Emma didn't feel entirely alone. She knew that what she felt for Luke was complicated, gentle, tender, and uncertain. But it was real, and for now, that was enough. The heart, she realized, remembers warmth long after sorrow arrives. And with Luke's visits, her heart was slowly remembering its own capacity to feel again. The week had been unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that made Emma reflect on everything that had changed since Luke began visiting. The house no longer felt empty, but her heart still carried the weight of loss. Each morning she woke, hoping for the familiar sound of his knock, a rhythm that had grown comforting. She tried not to expect it too much, not to build her happiness on someone else's choices. Still, when the knock came that afternoon, she felt a flutter of anticipation she hadn't felt in months. She opened the door to find Luke standing there, holding a small potted plant wrapped in brown paper. "I thought this might brighten the porch a little," he said softly. His hair was damp from a light drizzle, and he looked nervous, as if he weren't sure how she would react. Emma blinked, momentarily speechless. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The little blue flowers reminded her of forget-me-nots, fragile and delicate, yet full of life. She stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. He set the plant on the counter and looked around the kitchen with a faint smile. "It's still cozy," he said. "I like it this way." Emma nodded, her eyes following him as he moved about, making the space feel alive again. She hadn't realized how much the house had grown lonely until now. And Luke's presence made it feel like home once more. They settled at the kitchen table, pouring cups of tea. Luke's hand brushed hers for just a moment as he reached for the sugar, and Emma felt a warmth she didn't fully understand. She pulled her hand back quickly, but she noticed she didn't want to hide the spark that lingered between them. "You know," he said after a pause, "I've always admired your strength, Even when everything seems so hard, you carry it with such grace." Emma swallowed, touched by his words. "I don't feel strong," she admitted softly. "Some days I feel like I'm barely holding on." "You are," Luke said firmly, meeting her eyes. "Even when you feel weak, you're still standing. That's real strength." She looked at him, and in that moment, she realized how much she had come to rely on his presence, not just for help or company, but for understanding. He had become a part of her routine, her comfort, and in ways she hadn't expected, her hope. They talked about lighter things to Daniel, the town, old memories of high school adventures. They laughed at stories from years ago, and Emma felt a sense of normalcy she hadn't felt since her husband's passing. Luke didn't try to replace the love she had lost. He simply shared the space beside her, making it less lonely, more alive. Later, Luke helped her carry the potted plant to the porch. The air was cool, the sky tinged with the soft gold of the late afternoon sun. He knelt for a moment to plant it in a small clay pot, his movements careful, deliberate. Emma watched her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. When he stood, he looked at her with a gentle intensity. "Emma, he began, then paused as if reconsidering his words. She took a step closer, feeling a mixture of nervousness and longing. "Luke, it's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to explain everything right now." He smiled, a quiet, tender smile that reached his eyes. "I just want you to know that I care about you," he said. "I care about your happiness. I know things are complicated, but I wanted you to know." Her chest tightened, emotions swirling. She thought of her husband, of the love they shared, and of the void that had consumed her life. Yet here was someone who offered warmth without pressure, who allowed her to feel without judgment. She realized that grief and new beginnings could coexist, that the heart could still find room for hope. For a moment, neither spoke. They stood on the porch, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of rain and flowers. Emma's eyes softened as she looked at him, recognizing the care and sincerity in every gesture. "Luke," she said quietly, "you remind me that life can still surprise us." He took her hand gently, a gesture full of reassurance. "Then maybe that's a good thing," he replied. The air between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities. It wasn't rushed, not dramatic. It was subtle, meaningful, and profoundly tender. Emma realized that her heart, so long closed by grief, was opening in small, careful increments. She felt safe letting it happen. Luke didn't pull away, and neither did she. The moment stretched, filled with warmth, understanding, and mutual respect. It was a connection that transcended words, a quiet acknowledgement that life could be beautiful again, even after loss. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the porch, Emma invited him inside. "Come in, Luke," she said softly. "Stay a little while?" Smiled, relief and happiness mingling in his eyes. "I'd like that," he said. Inside, the house felt alive. The walls, the furniture, even the air seemed lighter. Emma realized that Luke's presence had not only brightened her days, but also reminded her of her own strength, her own capacity to feel joy and connection again. The grieving widow she had been was still there. But now she was joined by a woman capable of embracing life once more. They sat together in the living room, tea in hand, watching the sunlight fade. Their conversation drifted from memories to hopes for the future. And Emma felt a sense of ease she hadn't known she was missing. Luke's visits had become more than comfort. They had become a lifeline, a reminder that human connection could heal even the deepest wounds by the time he left that evening. Emma felt a gentle ache of longing, not of loneliness, but of anticipation. She realized that she wanted him to come back to continue sharing moments like this, to help her discover the small joys life still held. As she closed the door behind him, she felt something shift within her. The house, the air, even her own heart seemed brighter. For the first time since the funeral, she didn't feel empty. She felt hope. She felt warmth. She felt the possibility of love again, not a replacement for what she had lost, but something new, tender, and meaningful. Emma placed the potted plant on the windowsill. its tiny blooms swaying gently in the fading light. She smiled to herself, thinking of Luke, thinking of the unexpected ways life could surprise her. She felt a quiet determination to allow herself to experience joy again, to let new connections flourish while honoring the past. That night, as she prepared for bed, Emma reflected on the past weeks. Luke's presence had brought light to her days, laughter to her afternoons, and a renewed sense of purpose to her evenings. She realized that healing wasn't linear, it came in moments, in gestures, in quiet conversations, and in unexpected visits. And in that moment, Emma understood something profound. Life could continue. Love could return in new forms, and the heart could expand to hold both grief and joy, memory and hope, past and future. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. Tomorrow, she knew, Luke would come again, and together, they would continue to navigate the delicate path between loss and life, sorrow and love, memory and new beginnings. For Emma, the knock at the door had changed everything. It had opened a door within her heart, one she hadn't known was closed. And through it, warmth, connection, and the gentle promise of love had finally returned. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air still smelled like loss. Emma Harris sat in the living room, wrapped in her late husband's blanket, staring at the dim light of the fireplace. The world outside had moved on. Cars passed by, neighbors went about their lives, and somewhere down the street, laughter echoed faintly. But inside her home, everything stood still: time, sound, and even her heartbeat. It had only been 3 days since the funeral, but to Emma, it already felt like a lifetime had passed. The ceremony had been beautiful, people said. Friends came, flowers covered the church steps, and her son Daniel stood tall beside her, trying to be strong. She remembered how his hand had shaken when he folded the flag that once lay across his father's casket. He'd only been 21, too young to lose his father. Too young to carry that kind of grief. When the guests left and the house emptied, Emma found herself alone for the first time in 25 years. Every room whispered his name. The kitchen still held his coffee cup from that last morning. His reading glasses sat by the bedside table, untouched. She wanted to move them, but she couldn't. Touching them felt like erasing him. The afternoon sun dimmed into gray clouds. She tried to distract herself, cleaned the counter, folded laundry, made tea, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The quietness of the house grew louder, pressing against her chest. She walked into the hallway and paused at a framed photo. Her wedding day. She could still remember his laugh, deep and warm, the way his eyes lit up when he looked at her. She touched the frame gently, her lips quivering. "You promised we'd grow old together," she whispered. The silence that followed was unbearable. She sat back down in his armchair, the one he used to read in every night. It still smelled faintly of cedar and his cologne. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't fight them this time. They fell freely, mixing grief with exhaustion. She'd been strong through the funeral, strong for Daniel. But now there was no one left to hold that mask for. The phone buzzed beside her, texts from friends and neighbors offering help. "We're here for you. Call if you need anything." She appreciated their kindness, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Words felt too small for the emptiness she carried. She closed her eyes and let the sound of rainwater dripping from the roof lull her into memories. She remembered the road trips they took when Daniel was little, the smell of pine trees, and her husband humming along to old country songs. She remembered nights when they stayed up late, talking about everything and nothing. She remembered the way he used to squeeze her hand 3 times. "I love you." When she opened her eyes again, the house looked darker. The clock ticked steadily, echoing through the living room. The sound made her restless. She stood up and walked to the window, staring into the gray drizzle outside. The world looked normal, but nothing about it felt that way. A car door slammed somewhere nearby, snapping her out of her thoughts. She turned her head, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery truck. But the street looked empty. Then, just as she turned to go back inside, there was a knock at the door. A soft, almost uncertain knock. Her heart jumped slightly. No one had visited since the morning Daniel left. She wiped her eyes, fixed her hair out of habit, and walked slowly to the door. Another knock came, gentle, patient. She opened it halfway. Standing on the porch was a young man, maybe in his mid-20s, with rain dripping from his jacket. His expression was kind but awkward, as if he wasn't sure he should be there. "Double quotes, Mrs. Harris," he said. His voice was deep, calm, familiar somehow. Emma blinked, trying to place him. Then he gave a small, uncertain smile. "It's Luke. Luke Bennett. I used to come here all the time with Daniel." The name stirred something in her memory. Luke, Daniel's old high school friend. He'd been over for dinners, helped mow the lawn one summer, even joined them for Christmas once when his parents were away. She hadn't seen him in years, Luke, she said softly, her voice almost breaking. "My goodness. It's been so long." He nodded. "Yeah, I'm sorry to come unannounced. I heard about Mr. Harris. I wanted to say how sorry I am." His sincerity caught her off guard. Most people had sent cards or messages, but Luke had come in person. It touched something inside her that she hadn't felt since the funeral, the comfort of human presence. "You must be soaked," just stepping aside. "Come in, please." He hesitated, but then nodded and entered quietly, wiping his shoes on the mat. The warmth of the house enveloped him, carrying that faint scent of coffee and wood polish. He looked around slowly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. "It looks the same," he said softly. "Just like I remember." Emma smiled faintly. "Some things never change," she replied, though in her heart everything had. They stood there in awkward silence for a moment before she gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like some tea?" "Sure," he said. "If it's no trouble." As she filled the kettle, she caught herself glancing at him. He'd grown older, taller, his features sharper, but his eyes still the same calm warmth. She remembered. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, never rushed. "I moved back to town a few months ago," he said. "Been working nearby. Daniel and I lost touch after college, but when I heard about your husband, I wanted to see how you were doing." His words were simple, but they felt sincere. She nodded, unsure what to say. The kettle whistled, breaking the quiet. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him. He thanked her softly, their hands almost brushing for a second. It startled her, that tiny spark of contact, reminding her of how long it had been since someone had reached out to her, literally or emotionally. They sat at the small kitchen table. Luke asked a few gentle questions, how Daniel was coping, how she was managing. She answered honestly but briefly. Talking about it still hurt, but it felt different talking to him. There was no pity in his voice, only understanding. When the clock struck 7, he stood to leave. "I should get going," he said. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't," she said quickly. "It was nice having company." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reminded her of light after rain. "I'll stop by again sometime, if that's okay." Her first instinct was to say no, to protect herself from more emotion. But the loneliness in the house pressed against her like a shadow. She took a breath and said, "That would be nice, Luke." He nodded and stepped out into the cool evening. She watched from the doorway as he walked down the path, the setting sun glinting on his wet hair. When she closed the door, the house still felt quiet, but not as empty as before. Something had shifted. For the first time since the funeral, she felt the smallest flicker of life returning. And deep inside, she couldn't help but wonder what had brought him back now, this moment, when she needed someone the most. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window again. The gray sky hung low, and the house carried that same quiet heaviness she'd grown used to. But this time, there was something different, something softer lingering in her thoughts. She kept remembering Luke's face at the door, his gentle voice, the way he had spoken with such genuine kindness. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her like that, not with pity, but with understanding. She made herself a cup of coffee and stood by the kitchen window. The world outside was washed in silver light. She told herself she wouldn't expect him to come again. People said things out of politeness all the time. Still, a part of her small but stubborn hoped she'd hear that knock again by late afternoon, when she had almost convinced herself to forget it. There it was, 2 light knocks. Her heart jumped. She opened the door and there stood Luke again, holding a small paper bag. "I brought muffins," he said, smiling a little awkwardly. "Thought maybe you hadn't eaten much lately?" Emma's lips parted in surprise, then curved into the first real smile she'd had in weeks. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," Luke replied, "but I wanted to." She stepped aside to let him in. He placed the bag on the counter, glancing around the house again. This time his presence didn't feel out of place. It felt normal, warm. He took off his jacket and they sat at the table again, sharing the muffins and some tea. They talked about simple things, how his new job was going, what it was like being back in his old hometown, how quiet the neighborhood had become. For the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel like a widow. She just felt like herself. Luke's company had a calming effect on her. He didn't try to make her talk about her husband's death, but he didn't avoid the subject either. When she brought it up, he listened, really listened. She told him how strange it felt waking up to an empty bed, how she still reached out for someone who wasn't there. Her voice shook, but Luke didn't interrupt. He didn't try to comfort her with meaningless words. Instead, he simply said, "I can't imagine what that's like, but you're allowed to miss him. You're allowed to take your time." Those words, simple as they were, hit her deeply. Everyone else kept telling her to stay strong, to move forward. Luke instead gave her permission to just feel. That evening, when he left, he said, "I'll check on you again tomorrow if that's all right." She nodded, unable to hide the faint hope in her eyes.